Welcome to Econ 102, where economist Noah Smith and I make sense of what's happening in the news, technology, business, and beyond through the lens of economics. Let's jump right in. Hello, sir.
Hi.
Hey, how we doing?
It's a first really hot day of the year, I think, in San Francisco.
Yeah, wow. Crazy.
Yeah, I had to put my rabbit in his AC room.
Oh, really?
Yes, I only have one room with AC in it, but I put him in there.
Cool. Well, before getting into it, all's good with you?
Yeah, I just turned in book draft.
Oh, congratulations. Wow.
I'm a little behind on my writing for my actual blog, but that,
Well, it's amazing that you're able to do both.
it was a lot of work. But yeah, it's actually, the book is, would I tell you about this? It's half old stuff, half new stuff.
Oh, no, you didn't tell me that breakdown. What is the new stuff more focused on, or which part of that?
The new stuff is about how to revive Japan's economy, essentially, and saying that FDI is kind of it's the missing piece. Basically, the two things that everyone talks about are sort of reforming Japanese corporate culture, because macro policy is played out in Japan. There's not much room for that anymore. And so it's basically about raising productivity. And the two things people always talk about are reforming Japan's corporate culture and, sort of financial incentives for big companies, like, traditional companies, and then entrepreneurship, start new companies. And so those are kind of the two things that everyone talks about. And Japan's, it's kind of doing those things. But then FDI is kind of the third piece. And Japan's very well positioned right now to, get a whole bunch of people to invest in the country, both in terms of, big investments like the semiconductor fabs they're building in Kumamoto and other places. TSMC is building some. Actually, Samsung and Micron are also building fabs in Japan. And so it's very well positioned for that, but also, entrepreneurship. So like Sakana AI is like a well-known one. Midjourney's opening a branch office. Do you know the guys at Spellbrush, by the way?
No, I don't know them.
Oh, you would like them. They're partners with Midjourney. I think they're the only company that has a partnership with Midjourney in terms of like revenue sharing. And so they created a second engine, sort of AI art engine that Midjourney can run called Niji Journey, where you basically make anime. It's all for anime, because it turns out that anime has like the most training data of anything, and it's very recognizable style, and it's very easy to make very good anime art with AI. And so a lot of a decent chunk of Midjourney's revenue comes from this anime art partnership with Spellbrush, and they have like offices right next to each other and are all friends. And I think they got the founder of Midjourney to physically physically help lug their cluster around and install it, so they can brag that they got the founder of Midjourney to do manual labor. And so anyway, they're opening a branch office in Japan, obviously, because like, why wouldn't you if you're an anime art group? And so I went and interviewed them about their investments in Japan and what were sort of the barriers they faced to setting up a business in Japan.
Interesting. Are you hoping that this is going beyond Japan, like a model of or a contribution to sort of our understanding of international economic development, or how much of it is Japan specific versus can be applied elsewhere too?
The part of the book that's about this is really about Japan specifically, and it's about why people love Japan and therefore want to live there, and that's basically gives Japan a big leg up in FDI. But I think that in general we're recognizing the importance of foreign direct investment as a sort of a development strategy more than we did in the past. I think for pretty much most of the 20th century and even into the 2000s, people thought FDI is kind of inferior because international businesses, these multinational companies, will just they'll establish branches in your country and then outcompete you in your own domestic market. So you won't be able to, your own domestic market won't be available to your own brands, and then they won't transfer the technology over, and they'll own the brands and they'll keep all the valuable work outside of the country, and they'll just use this low end assembly platform, right? And actually, we have seen a couple countries where that did sort of happen. Especially, I think the most prominent kind of disappointing case where it was very FDI heavy, but it never managed to progress beyond middle income is Thailand. Thailand reached middle income and then it kind of stopped, and it had a very FDI heavy development model. But then you've seen some other countries go far beyond what Thailand has been able to accomplish. So you've seen Poland, you've seen Malaysia, and I think you've seen China as well was pretty FDI intensive. And so and Taiwan to some extent. And so I think you've seen these countries break through middle income to upper income levels. with a strategy that's very dependent on FDI. And so I think there may still be some limitations to this, right? Like all the old worries and limitations might still be true, but they're just not severe enough to take away the case for major FDI. I think it's, and the cool thing about FDI is it's much easier than, it's much simpler than the Korea style industrial policy of developing all your own domestic brands and being like an export powerhouse with your own domestic champions. Like everyone's like, wow, Korea, but like almost no one does that. Like the list of countries that have done that in the, since World War II is very few. That is basically how America, Japan, Germany, and the UK and France all developed. But in the years since World War II, not many countries have used that effectively. Taiwan's sort of a hybrid. They've done sort of half that and half the FDI thing. And they gained a lot from being sort of a portal for China investment, et cetera. But Singapore and Ireland, in both richer than the United States, even if you count Ireland's income correctly and ignore the tax haven bullshit, they're still richer than America, and that's all FDI. Like name an Irish brand, you can't name a Singaporean brand. Like you can't. So, I mean, Temasek, but that's just a holding company that does infrastructure shit. Like, basically Ireland and Singapore are extensions of the American economy, and some others. They take FDI from various other sources too. But they grew rich on FDI, and then you have Poland and Malaysia, which are like almost rich, and then you have Taiwan and China. And so I think that now basically FDI is becoming this plug and play development strategy. There's also other examples of this too. So Hungary, Romania, those, and to a little bit Turkey, like Turkey somewhat. And I think we're going to see other countries. Oh, so Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is becoming our Caribbean Ireland. If you look at the growth, especially like, people look at like Haiti is like stuck at extreme poverty, and then Dominican Republic, like, psh.
And what's the key to doing FDI well? Is it just saying, "Hey, America, we want to work. We'll do whatever you say." What is the key to?
I mean, yeah, that's part of it. Like you have to build capacity. You have to build, first of all, you have to have political stability. Ireland's big FDI boom began once the Troubles ended, right? This little like sort of terrorism campaign kind of political, well, and which was mostly Northern Ireland, but like it did involve people on the Irish side of the border. And so, Singapore has a famous political stability. And then, so you need that, and you need infrastructure. You need to build electricity, water, blah, blah. And you need, tax incentives or like basically just low tax, right? For this kind of thing. And not many, not very onerous bureaucracy. So you need that. And then you can, target specific industries and then work with them, call up the like biopharma industry and say, what do you need, guys? And then you need educated populace. You can read. Depending on what, I mean, like depending on what you do, sometimes you need like scientists and whatever, and sometimes you just need like people who can read, right? And so you call people up, and then you can get their specialized needs too to some degree. But then so the question is, how do you make sure that FDI gives you the maximum benefit? That's the more interesting question, right? We know how to lure FDI. The question is, how do you shape FDI so that it gives you maximum benefit? And I think one of the things we're learning is joint venture requirements are very useful. So you say, look, guys, we'll let you invest in us and take advantage of our cheap labor, cheap land, cheap whatever we give you, right? Cheap electricity. But you've got to open a joint venture with one of our companies and teach us how to do your stuff. And so eventually you train a local workforce of engineers and managers who know Western management techniques and who understand the technology of what they're building. And then I think that's one thing. Basically, arranging technology transfer, I think, is really important. And yeah, and so eventually, the people who learn how to do all that stuff at the foreign companies, the people in Poland who learn how to build cars for Volkswagen, right? They'll eventually go start their own companies doing something. And usually those are going to be upstream companies. Usually that's going to be like, Poland starts an auto parts company. You've never heard of it because no one hears about auto parts companies. But it sells auto parts, and parts can be super high value. Parts can be like a lot of value added can be in like parts and components. And so that's like an example of how technology transfer works. And so I think that's kind of the key. And also, but I think that one of the reasons we're discovering FDI is better than we thought is because in order to attract that FDI, it forces you to reshape institutions. And it forces you to, if German companies are going to come invest in Poland, Poland's got to behave sort of like a Germany, just Germany East. They would resent that idea because of the past and history of Germany invading them. But they basically like Poland, in order to get German companies to invest, has to be more like Germany institutionally, like in terms of like, I don't know, bureaucracy and taxes and regulations and things like that. And, like you've got to be able to go to the Polish government and say, hey, guys, we need this thing for our auto parts company, the same way you'd go to the German government, basically. And so I think that institutional spread. Now, of course, China didn't do this, and I think they may be hurt by that now. But I think Ireland and Singapore certainly did. I think that Malaysia, to some extent. I mean, I think Malaysia is a little bit of a special case. We can go into that later. But then I think Dominican Republic now is doing very well with institutional improvement. Do you know that Dominicans in America are poorer than Haitians?
No, I didn't know.
Oh, yeah, quite poorer. And you know why? Yeah, well, because all like Dominican economy is so great that like if you're a talented Dominican, you stay there and you build a business. You could, or you just work for the like economic growth is happening. So they, but if you're a talented Haitian, you get the fuck out. And so like it's selection effect, right? And so
That's an effect of immigration, by the way. I don't know if people talk about it enough. Is what does it do to the home country of the brain drain? Basically, like do we measure the impact of the brain drain when we consider the pros and cons of immigration?
yeah, I've actually written about that. I wrote about when brain drain happens and when it doesn't. So I can send you that old post that I wrote. I don't remember if it was before we did our podcast. I think maybe, I don't remember. But yeah, so the basic story is that there's two kind of countries that suffer from brain drain, and then everyone else gains more than they lose. The two kinds of countries that suffer. So first I'll explain why countries gain. It's called brain gain. Brain gain. I can only imagine the people who just listen to this podcast and can only imagine the silly faces I'm making as I say these things. But brain gain, the biggest mechanism of brain gain is that once people in a poor country hear about the opportunities available overseas from immigration, they all go and get an education.
Interesting.
And the most famous older case of this is the Philippines. I was talking to my friend, my Filipino friend yesterday. I mean, Filipino American. Her parents came over as kids, but she said that basically her family all came over to work in like healthcare. Like everybody comes from the Philippines, and you go to like hospitals. Everybody's Filipino, in healthcare. It's like huge. Everybody's piling into this industry. Filipino doctors, just a lot of healthcare people. Why? Well, because back when we restricted immigration a lot more heavily, we made a big exception for Filipino nurses. Filipina, I should say, with gendered endings, but whatever. Filipino nurses, we were like, okay, y'all can come. And then everyone in the Philippines, which is like dirt poor agrarian, peasant economy, was like, shit, I could be a nurse in America. Amazing. And so that like everybody just trained to be a nurse. Like the whole country is just like nurse. And so like now, like Philippines produces like a lot of the best nurses in the world and just random healthcare professionals, phlebotomists, I don't know. And then they so it became this big thing. And so you gained a lot of the stuff. The other big example is India and IT. India's IT industry happened because we allowed immigration. When we allowed Indian like engineers to move here, largely on H-1B, but through other stuff as well, a whole lot of people in India, like, was a dirt poor country. It's now on the up and up, but it was pretty goddamn poor in the 90s. Like, and people were like, holy shit, I could be a software engineer in America, make it in America. So everybody went and studied software in India. And like just millions of people went and got software degrees because they were like, that's how I'm going to get to America. And so less hardware because America didn't do so much hardware stuff. And we certainly didn't get a shit ton of immigrants to come over and be like hardware engineers. And so not as many Indians studied hardware. So India, some did. I don't want to be too blanket here, but so basically about India people studied software. And now India has this amazing domestic software industry that has really done a lot for the growth. And software is one of their main exports. And it's also helping them now. It's helping them do manufacturing because India is particularly good at automating factories with software because they've got just a million. Like the stereotype that like every like Indian person knows how to code. Well, partly that's selection, of course, because that's who we let in. But the stereotype is because of our immigration policy. It's because of brain gain. And the number of people who studied software in India was something like 20 times the number of people we let come over here. So the gain was enormous. And so that's brain gain. And there's other mechanisms too. For example, Indian Americans will invest more in India and then set up businesses that transfer technology back to India. So that's technically called brain circulation. And people sometimes move over to like work in India. Oh, you'll see this a lot with China. You'll see a lot of like Chinese Americans going to start businesses in China. Do you know Robin Chan?
Robin Chan,
Yeah.
the entrepreneur.
Yeah. And
Yeah, I know.
His parents or his ancestors came from I think Hong Kong like a long ass time ago and moved to Hawaii. And then he's like, when he saw China booming, he's like, wow, I'm going to go invest in that, And then he like was investing in like Tencent and Xiaomi, like early on. He was like one of the most important tech investors in China just because, he was like, he had this, but now he's back in America because of the investment climate has worsened. But like he did a lot for China, and that's brain circulation. And you're seeing that with India too, to some degree. And so you see that. So that said, just the mechanical effect of removing smart people from your country can hurt a country. It's just usually outweighed by that other stuff. But there are two classes of countries for which brain drain dominates. And the first class of country is rich countries. France does not need like French Americans to like invest. They can invest on their own. And France is already educated. Everyone who can get an education in France already does, right? They're a fully educated country. They don't need immigration to America to inspire them to like get more degrees. Okay. So that's that. But so rich countries. The other example is very small countries. So like Haiti is a good example here. Brain drain from Haiti can really hurt it because, the reason for brain gain is that you have this massive pool of technically competent, qualified people just sitting around not getting an education because like there's no domestic opportunities, who then get an education for the purpose of immigration. And then, so you get that. But then in Haiti, there's not enough people, right? You move a substantial part of the population of Haiti over to America or wherever, then they're not going to be able to just like pop up with more, right? So if you selectively take all the smart people from a tiny country like that, you can hurt it actually. Which is why, by the way, we should repeal the country cap on immigration. So right now we take like the same number of people from India that we do from Haiti. That's stupid. And if we want to fix brain drain, then there's been a bill stalled in Congress forever and ever, like that would kill this country cap. We kill the country cap, right? The reason people stall it is because the big countries of the world are like India and China, and people are like more afraid than they'd like to admit of increased immigration from those places. But be that as it may, we should repeal the country cap because repealing the country cap is the way to eliminate brain drain, essentially. Except from rich countries. Like we'll still brain drain France, but you know what? Maybe you should just cut taxes, France. If you don't want us brain draining, you cut your taxes. I don't know. But then like, that's libertarian brain drain. People voting with their feet, right? So libertarians shouldn't be so worried about that. It's just, but brain drain from rich countries, who cares? Like rich countries compete for talent and that's normal. That's fine. It's the brain drain from the tiny poor countries that we want to prevent. And the way to prevent that is by repealing our country cap.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. You like to optimize things. You've chosen the perfect credit card to maximize your travel points, and you always find the fastest route when you drive. Shouldn't you handle your charitable giving the same way? GiveWell spends 50,000 hours every year doing deep dives into different charitable programs to try to find the ways to do the most good for your dollar. GiveWell has now spent over 17 years researching charitable organizations and only directs funding to a few of the highest impact opportunities they've found. Over 100,000 donors have used GiveWell to donate more than $2 billion. Rigorous evidence suggests that these donations will save over 200,000 lives and improve the lives of millions more. It's easy to see why the Boston Globe called GiveWell the gold standard for giving. GiveWell wants as many donors as possible to make informed decisions about high-impact giving. You can find all of their research and recommendations on their site for free. You can make tax-deductible donations to their recommended funds or charities, and GiveWell doesn't take a cut. Go to givewell.org to find out more or make a donation. Select podcast and enter Econ102 at checkout to make sure they know you heard about them from us. Again, that's givewell.org to donate or find out more. As a developer, the journey from concept to production-ready LLM apps is fraught with challenges. Dealing with unpredictable LLM outputs, correctly handling PII, and ballooning API costs can all be blockers to shipping your next AI-powered feature. Weights and Biases Weave is a lightweight AI developer toolkit designed to simplify your LLM app development. With Weave, You can trace and debug input, metadata, and output with just 2 lines of code. Weave helps you run rigorous evaluations and securely manage all of your data sets and system configurations, so you can focus on what matters most, iterating and improving on your LLM-powered applications. Plus, Weave integrates seamlessly with your favorite APIs and libraries, including OpenAI, Anthropic, Mistral AI, Cohere, LangChain, Llama Index, and more. Make real progress on your LLM development and visit wnb.me/cr to get started with Weave today. That's wnb.me/cr.
That's well articulated. Let me ask another question that relates to sort of relying on the U.S. How should countries think about their reliance on the dollar in terms, or like or maybe you can explain a little bit the connection between when the U.S. has, inflation, how that impacts countries that rely on the dollar, or when the U.S. has more severe inflation than expected, and how other countries do they kind of foot the bill more than the U.S. Even. Maybe you can explain that, how that works in the sort of true to Econ 102 form, and then we can talk about what countries should do.
Sure. Well, so there's basically 2 classes of countries. So there's countries with fixed exchange rates and countries with floating exchange rates, and it's going to affect those differently. Because for countries with floating exchange rates, their exchange rate can just adjust to cancel out inflation. And there's something called uncovered interest parity. It's a formula that basically says oh, your inflation went up. Well, then your currency gets weaker because now your dollar can't buy as much stuff. And so that's, with floating currencies, inflation doesn't really make a big deal because exchange rates pretty much adjust. Now they don't adjust immediately, and they don't adjust with perfect knowledge. They bounce around a bunch, and it's, but over time they kind of do. But then you have countries with fixed exchange rates. So countries that peg their currencies to the dollar. Now there's 2 groups of those. There's the countries that peg their currencies low so they can increase exports, and there's the countries that peg their currencies high so they can increase imports. So usually manufacturing-based countries will try to peg their currency low so they can have as much possible orders for their stuff, so they can employ everybody, and maybe so their companies can gain market share, whatever. So who intervenes to keep their currency low? Well, Taiwan definitely does. Vietnam definitely does. So they do that. But then there's countries that intervene to keep their currencies high, and those are mostly commodity exporters. So you'll see countries in Latin America do this a lot. They'll peg their currency to the dollar, but then they'll peg it very high. And so, the various Latin American currencies will be too expensive. So they'll be able to buy a lot of stuff, buy a lot of imports, but then their currency is higher than the market would bear. And therefore it's subject to a sudden currency outflow and an attack, a speculative attack. And so when America does inflation, it means that the dollar wants to get cheaper, right? Because it's worth less, it can buy less stuff. The dollar wants to get cheaper. So a country that pegs its currency too high against the dollar actually gets relief from that, because since the proper market value of the dollar drops, so it makes it easier for them to sustain this value for their stuff. So that actually makes it easier for them to maintain their peg when we have inflation. But then for countries that peg their currencies low, like Vietnam, our inflation makes it harder for them to sustain market share because our stuff gets cheaper, basically. And that puts pressure on their currencies to appreciate. And in order to stop the currency from appreciating, what they need to do is print a bunch of their own currency to devalue their own currency against the dollar to maintain the peg, or a soft peg or intervention, whatever you want, whatever it is, right? Not necessarily a peg. But they need to basically, if we print a bunch of dollars and the dollar starts getting cheaper, and they're like, whoa, we don't want these cheap dollars. We want the oh man, what is the Vietnamese currency? I always forget this. Oh, it's the dong. That's why I always forget it, because it's a silly name. We want cheap dong. The dong must be cheap, and so they have to print a bunch of dong. Right? They create a bunch of dong, and then dong gets cheaper, but that raises the inflation in Vietnam. Just maximum dong.
I can't handle too many dogs. Yeah, absolutely. So, Balaji, we'll talk about, hey, it's important, or we're seeing more countries that are sort of shifting off of the dollar and, going towards, either wanting to work with the China and renminbi or something else. Do you think is that happening? Are countries shifting on reliance on the dollar? And should that happen? How do you think this should play out?
Well, that's a great question. So the reason for countries to want to shift off the dollar is not inflation, because our inflation is not high. If our inflation went to 20%, maybe. But honestly, if they have floating exchange rates, if they have floating exchange rates, then it's not a problem because their exchange rates will just adjust. If they have fixed exchange rates and they peg their currency too high, our inflation makes their peg easier, and they wouldn't want to shift off the dollar. Because remember, those commodity exporters who want to buy all their like luxury goods from America or whatever, those people, they want the dollar to be cheap, right? So they can buy more American shit with their oil or their minerals or whatever they export, right? They want to be able to afford more shit from America. So those people are happy when we have inflation, right? Because it makes our stuff cheaper and they can get more of it. They want the stuff, right? Countries like Vietnam want the markets. They want the money. Vietnam wants the money, and like Latin America wants the stuff from us, okay? And so when our stuff gets cheaper, right? When our stuff gets cheaper, then the Latin American countries love it. Vietnam doesn't like it. The Southeast Asian countries don't like it. They don't like that. Because they want the money, and when our money gets cheaper, then that's bad for them. So it depends on who you are. The countries that are thinking about using yuan more in payments are not thinking about that because of inflation. Inflation does not provide much of an incentive to do that. However, if inflation got so high that it was very volatile and it was very like it became hard to like do currency swaps and like you had to take on exchange rate risk to use the dollar in payments and blah blah bullshit. Yes, okay, but our inflation never even got close to that ever. Like it's just not, and like now inflation's back down anyway. Like it never got close to the level where it was going to cause that sort of problem. But the reason people would want to shift away from using the dollar as payment has nothing to do with inflation. It has everything to do with geopolitics. Everybody saw our financial sanctions on Russia, and they're like, what if they do that to us someday? And so they're like, okay, well, let's try to use the yuan. They're not able to do it because China doesn't actually want the yuan to be used internationally, because that will cause them to lose a lot of control over the value of the yuan, and they really, really highly prize their control over the value of the yuan. They really jealously guard that power. And the more internationalized a currency becomes, the less power they have over the value of their currency, because the more capital inflows and outflows will happen, and then they have to like do more sterilization and more capital controls and more bullshit control stuff to like stop that from happening, right? So the more internationalized their currency becomes, the less control they have. So they don't really want it to be used. They don't really want to internationalize their currency. They say they do, but then they realize they don't. Every time they start to do it, they realize they don't, and they clamp down, and then Russia will try to use yuan, but honestly, Russia's use of yuan has plunged, and partly that was because Chinese banks are afraid to do business with Russia. So yeah, that's so basically, if people switch to the yuan, by the way, people should switch to the yuan more. China's currency should be more internationalized. America can't sort of like hold up the whole global financial system by ourselves anymore. We need China to help. We need China to internationalize their currency. They just don't actually want to.
Interesting. And so are we heading towards a world in the next decade or two, in your opinion, that the US won't be the reserve currency in the way that we understand it today? Or how do you expect that? Like, are we having a multipolar?
I mean, I would like it if we were less of the reserve currency. I think if we're not the reserve currency is not going to be yuan.
There's going to be zero.
Well, people could hold fewer reserves, for one thing. That could happen. But also, people could hold euros. People can hold gold.
Is there a certain number by which, like, when would we know when we're no longer the reserve currency? Is it like a percentage?
Early 90s, we went down to like, I think 30% of international reserves.
And now are we like 40 or something?
No, we're like a little under 60.
Oh, interesting.
So like if you look at, let me actually pull that up.
What happened in the 90s?
Currency composition of official. Now this doesn't include gold, but like go for data 1990s. Like, I'm having trouble finding one that goes back that far. Yeah, no, I'm having trouble just finding one right off the top of my head. But in the 90s, it went down quite a bit. In the early 90s, like it reached kind of a low point, and then it went back up. Yeah, so it could go down, and like that didn't hurt us. Like, honestly, there's a lot of bullshit thrown around about a lot of economic topics, but this is one of the worst. Like the dollar, like like a guy, running, he's a very like blue collar working class dude running as an independent for Congress in the Midwest. came out to solicit some money from Silicon Valley people, and then we met the cafe and we talked for a while, and he was like, I think China's ultimate goal is to destroy the dollar. And I like, that's their plot. That's China's plot, to take over the world, to destroy the dollar. I was like, no, the opposite. China wants the dollar to be strong so they can sell us as much stuff as they want, and so they don't have to internationalize their own currency and lose control over their own currency. Like, China wants a strong dollar.
This is what they talk about when they refer to dumping, or is that something different?
That's something different. But yeah, I mean, like, like spiritually, it's similar because they want to sell as much stuff as possible, so they're the only country that makes anything. That's what China wants.
And is this what they want in a long-term way, or is it kind of like an interim thing?
No, long term.
Yeah.
They want to be the make everything country. They want to be the only source of industrialization while everyone else just farms. And they've said that. They've said that explicitly.
Yeah, interesting. This relates actually to a question from listener Bilal Ali, which is on China more broadly. And any thoughts on the recent Chinese stimulus? Too little, too late? Question mark.
Oh, so the stimulus is actually not that big and mostly focused on propping up stock values. It's a good start. Like, you could, it's a good start. It's good to see them being a little more Keynesian. But hidden, like less talked about, is a measure that's very important and that will help them a lot, which is the bank bailout. So they call it a capital injection. That is a fancy term for, I mail you a check, here is money, bank. Here, bank, have money. Now you have more money. Yay. And so that's a bailout, right? It's a bank bailout. It's what we did to our banks. It's not done in quite the same manner, but it's basically similar. China needs to bail out its banks, especially its local banks. Basically, all its banks are insolvent, and they need capital injections, and then they will be solvent again, and then they will lend, and then they will do the things the Chinese government wants them to do, etc. So the bank bailout was very smart. They're going to have to bail out the local government financing vehicles too. Essentially, now in China, you have massive amounts of local debt and a small amount of central government debt. The debt of the central government is quite low, and the debt of the local governments and banks is quite high. And their overall total debt as a percentage of GDP, I think, is about the same as us, which is bad for a poorer country. It's very high, but the central government's debt is quite low. So what they need to do is swap central government debt for local government debt and bank debt and private debt. So they need to take debt off of the hands of the private sector, the quasi-private, I mean, okay, that's not really private, but the quasi-private sector, and of the local government sector. And they need to transfer, and provincial governments, and they need to transfer that to the debt of the central government. And that will get China lending again. And that is what we did after 2008. And that is what Japan didn't do until the early 2000s, more than a decade. That's why they had the quote unquote lost decade. Japan did plenty of stimulus. They did stimulus out the butt, right? They concreted over like half the country, providing jobs for construction workers. They just did massive, massive stimulus, put lots of money in people's hands. And it worked in the short term, right? The 90s were called this lost decade, but they never had a big drop in employment. They had a small drop, small rises in unemployment, but most Japanese people who wanted a job still had a job because of the stimulus, but it was only a short-term thing. It couldn't keep working, and their lending was still depressed. And so finally they're like, okay, let's bail out the frickin' banks. So they did in like the 2000s, early 2000s, and they bailed out the banks. And then they had like an economic boom and for 7 years or something. And so they didn't actually have two lost decades. That's a myth. But so they bailed out the banks. China's going to do this earlier than Japan did, and that's going to help them. They have problems Japan didn't have, like Xi Jinping interfering with the whole economy and like being too large to export their way out of things. But they have a bunch of problems that Japan didn't have. But they're going to do better than Japan in terms of rapid bank bailouts. Now, they might wait too long to bail out the local government financing vehicles. They might bail out the banks, but not the LGFVs, and then they're still going to have a problem because those LGFVs have become really important to the Chinese economy. So it's like bailing out the banks and the shadow banks, right? You have to bail out the shadow banks too. And America did this with QE. We called it monetary easing, monetary policy, but really it was financial policy. We bought, the Fed created dollars and used them to buy shitty mortgage-backed bonds. And then guess what? The Fed made money on that trade because the shitty mortgage-backed bonds became unshitty when the economy recovered. And because they bought the shitty mortgage-backed bonds, the banks and the shadow banks and all these people had more confidence to start lending again. Lending picked back up much faster than in like Japan after their housing bubble. and lending picked back up, and the economy recovered, and then the mortgage-backed bonds that had been shitty 5 years ago were now good, and the Fed made money, and it lowered the U.S. deficit. Yay, success. Oh no, bailouts, QE, but yeah, we made money on it, and we resuscitated the economy, and we didn't have a lost decade, so shush.
We'll get back to the conversation in a moment after a word from our sponsors. Have you heard of this alternative investing company, alts.co? The idea behind it is simple. There are a million syndicates out there that co-invest in startups or real estate. But what about alternative investments? Where do you go if you want to invest in, say, Hollywood film financing deals, or a dozen barrels of tequila, or pro sports teams? There's a world of alternative investments out there, and boy, these guys are all over it. Their community, Altea, is a place for forward-thinking investors to invest in unique, vetted deals, meet captivating people, and enjoy once-in-a-lifetime travel experiences. Apply to join Altea. Who knows where things might lead? Travel, meet unique people, invest in asset classes that are a bit out of your usual lane. This is what Altea gives you. Unique, slightly uncomfortable, but incredibly rewarding experiences which not only help your portfolio, but stretch your mind and allow you to see the world differently. Check these guys out at alts.co/102. That's alts.co/102. alts.co/102. Hi, it's Erik. If you're looking to take a deeper dive into international affairs and business strategies, then I highly recommend listening to the new podcast, Dealcraft, Insights from Great Negotiators. Recently called a best podcast pick by The Guardian, Dealcraft features interviews with the world's greatest dealmakers and diplomats, including former Secretary of State Henry Kissinger, Blackstone's Steve Schwarzman, and music industry super lawyer John Branca, on their most challenging negotiations. Each episode, host Jim Sebenius, Harvard Business School professor and renowned negotiation expert, shares fascinating deal stories and distills useful insights for listeners to apply in their toughest deals and disputes. New episodes release weekly and explore everything from former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton's negotiations with Vladimir Putin to how Costa Rican diplomat Cristina Figueres saved the Paris climate talks. So don't miss out. Follow Dealcraft, Insights from Great Negotiators on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And isn't the lesson of 2008 that the bailout actually should have been bigger in the U.S.?
Well, no, I think we did the right amount of bailouts because I think that QE supplemented the actual bailout.
Or had more QE or something, or more printing, I guess?
We basically, no, we did enough. We did a lot of it. Should we have done it earlier? Maybe a little bit earlier, but like it is astonishing how rapidly we did deploy that.
Got it. Because Scott Sumner is like, we got to, NGDP should have been, targeted, hired.
I mean, he's not wrong in the formal sense, but when you look at our comparative performance relative to Europe, Japan, all these other countries, we pulled out the big bazooka much faster than anybody else did, and it worked. And we did it in a very smart way. People do not understand what a genius Ben Bernanke is. Like, it was such a stroke of luck that we had that guy where he was when he was. Like, this was at a time when macroeconomists didn't give a shit about finance. It wasn't in any of the models. Nobody was thinking about finance crashing the macroeconomy. Nobody except for Ben frickin' Bernanke, who happened to be the Fed chair when it happened. What are the odds? Like, that was an amazing stroke of luck. And like, people just don't understand how lucky we got and how important that was. Thanks, Bernanke.
Yeah. So history might be kinder to him than, not that he had like a terrible reputation or anything, but
yeah, no, history is going to be very kind to him. He was a real hero. And when you look at America's economic performance relative to practically any other rich country, almost any other rich country, maybe not like Australia because they have mining, whatever, but like almost any other rich country, we did well. And then we pulled out a similar playbook in COVID and we did better than anybody else, even China.
To that end, you were talking about Xi getting involved in the economy, and is his biggest mistake COVID, or what do you think will go down as like the biggest mistakes that he made?
Bernanke?
No, sorry, President Xi or Xi Jinping.
Oh, Xi Jinping. So his biggest mistake, I honestly think zero COVID was a big mistake, but it was a short mistake. And I don't think that ramifications from that are long lived, except in the political arena where people saw that like he had the capacity for extreme idiocy, like one man idiocy when everyone else was telling him stop that. He like persisted way too long in his mistake. And so I think that people there was an emperor has no clothes moment, which probably made a lot of Chinese people disillusioned with Chinese politics, where they had previously said, previously you had Deng, who's great, didn't always do like good stuff. He did Tiananmen Square, but like he was great for the economy. And then you had Zhang, who's great for the economy, and then you had Hu, who's great for the economy, and then you had Xi, who for his first term in the 2010s looked as if he was great for the economy. And they thought that it was continuity, right? That Xi wasn't really different than his predecessors and that like he was doing a great job. And then zero COVID punctured that aura. I wouldn't say it had big negative ramifications on China, but I would say it had political ramifications of puncturing the aura of hypercompetence of Xi. But I would say that in terms of consequential mistakes, his crackdown on tech sector, it was very consequential because basically you scared away like Chinese entrepreneurs. Like everyone thinks you're a state-owned economy now because he's just like, I don't think IT is a good kind of innovation. Like the sheer, I'm talking about like the people Robin Chan would fund. I'm talking about like these were the smartest people in China, and they were building a software industry that was globally competitive. You know, TikTok is just one thing. We could have had 10 TikToks. China could have destroyed our software industry. And they had all these brilliant entrepreneurs making really pioneering products and that were in some ways better than their American counterparts. Although, you know, it's institutional differences, like Tencent didn't spread beyond China because it's too unified, right? We didn't want to unify all our stuff in one place. But then, you know, so much energy and intensity was going into that. And then like, have you ever read Kai-Fu Lee's AI Superpowers? He describes working in China and the sheer amount of competitive brilliance and effort that went into that software industry. And then Xi Jinping was just like, no, fuck you, crush. And, you know, like, you are not real innovation. Go build me some computer chips or, you know, whatever. And all those guys are like, shit. You know, and then everyone told him, okay, this is wrong. And then so like a while later, he was like, okay, just kidding. Actually, we love the private sector, blah, blah, blah. And everyone was like, we don't trust you. And then they cracked down more later because like basically, and they tried to sell this internationally as like, oh, it's just antitrust. We're just being Lena Khan. Shut up. No, you weren't. You like in their official communiques internally, which we got translated, of course, because someone knows how to read Chinese, like, they said, oh, actually, we just don't believe this is the most valuable kind of innovation for China's national power. And that was stupid because China's manufacturing is great. Like, yeah, okay, fine, you built an electric car industry, but you didn't have to crush the software industry to do that. Innovation isn't like a tube of toothpaste where you just like stomp on one sector and then like talent comes flying out the other end. Like, it's not like that. You know, sometimes a lot of people who would have worked in the software industry or would have worked in tech now are just want government jobs, just want to like be quiet, ride out the storm. It's like, you know, people have institutional memory of like Mao and this stuff, and they don't want to be caught in that. They don't want to stick their necks out now that they saw you chop somebody's neck off. And like, so that was a big mistake. The real estate thing could have been handled better, but I think that was coming anyway to some degree. Probably made some like mistakes. Belt and Road was very poorly executed. I don't think it's going to be that consequential. But I think that it was extraordinarily poorly executed on Xi's part. But I would say that the tech crackdown was the biggest unforced error that will have long-term ramifications in terms of squelching China's entrepreneurial energies.
That's a good overview of Xi's legacy. I want to go to a question.
I mean, we don't know, you know, legacy so far is like, it's the worst day of my life. The worst day of your life so far. Like, I mean, these are Xi's biggest mistakes. I mean, the other big mistake Xi made was diplomatic. He sent out these like belligerent assholes called the Wolf Warrior diplomats to basically like yell and bluster and like scream a lot at every country. And like basically they acted like Kaiser Wilhelm did before World War One, which is why people loved Germany before Kaiser Wilhelm started being a dipshit. You know, like him and all his buddies, you know, these are the most, go read like some of his Kaiser Wilhelm speeches. He's just like, we will take over the world, Germany best, you know, like, you suck, your time is at a sunset, you know, it is our time now. like who asked for that shit? And he did it because he was like this very insecure closeted aristocrat who grew up with too much power and also like an inferiority complex. Like, but she has no freaking excuse. Like, he sent people out to just alienate everybody from India to Philippines, Vietnam. Like, he alienated everybody. And when people were prepared to like China.
Yeah, but One Belt, One Road is supposed to be popular. Like, it was supposed to be like a international, you know.
Yeah, they bungled the shit out of it because what they did was, when Belt and Road, Chinese banks would lend you a ton, you know, the developing country, whatever. They would lend you a ton of money with which, and you would use that money to pay Chinese industrial companies to build you infrastructure. Then the infrastructure sucked in quality or often didn't get built on time or just, wasn't great. There were a couple of successes and then a lot of failures. And then guess what? You're still on the hook to China. You still have to pay for that. And China's not very forgiving about debts. So like you have all these countries that got sort of debt trapped with shitty infrastructure. Like we're going to, this is mafia behavior. This is like, we're going to loan you money to pay us for stuff that doesn't work. And then you have to pay us back for the loan. Fuck that. So that's how One Belt, One Road was managed. And now they're trying to switch to a more sustainable, more reasonable model. The only place that really succeeded significantly, I would say, was in Indonesia, where Indonesia basically took over the operation of the infrastructure to make sure it went right. Because the point is, the Chinese companies who were getting this payola from this whole thing they had no incentive to get it right, so they just cut corners everywhere they could. People think of China as this unified hive mind. It is anything but.
And did China end up getting paid back, or did these countries just renege?
Well, the African countries are just like, nope.
Yeah, because what are they going to do?
And China's like, hey, you got to pay African country. Nope. And guess what? Nope. Bye. Want to lend us more? And then China's like, maybe not. So then they could have sent like warships to bombard African capitals until they like handed over the blood diamonds. But like they, we're like, okay, we're just going to fuck off and take the L on this one. And then a lot of countries like, Pakistan's still renegotiating. And then some countries like Sri Lanka was just like, all right, we can't pay the loan back. We'll give you the collateral, right? Here's a whole port. So now China owns a port of Sri Lanka that they built as the collateral. So that happened. And then and a lot of countries are still trying to renegotiate and they're not sure what's going to happen. And Indonesia is like, fine, it works, fine, we'll pay you back. Because they managed it themselves and made sure that the high-speed rail worked. Now, I will say that high-speed rail is 86 miles long, and it's their only one. It's not the most impressive thing I've ever seen, but it's better than nothing. And so we can't say that Belt and Road failed everywhere it was tried. But yeah, so then anyway, this is all like Xi Jinping just not paying much attention, just assuming that like everything China equals great. Remember that this guy failed his way to the top. He's the George W. Bush of China in many ways. He had got the gentleman's C, in his entrance exams, which he actually failed. And so like, because he grew up in a cave and didn't get great education, is not like the smartest guy on earth, and had this famous dad, right? His dad was famous. His mom was fairly famous. His dad was very famous. And then like, he had these famous parents. So he's a princeling, and they had a lot of clout with the right people and wrote him letters to get him into this and that. And then he turned out to be very good at infighting, which is probably why his dad was famous too, honestly. But he turned out to be very good at infighting and sort of knifing all his rivals like Bo Xilai and Zhou Yongkang and all these guys that he knifed. And he was very good at rising to the top of this meritocratic organization without merit, and then taking control of it by putting all his own stupid cronies into positions of power. Like this guy Kai Shi, you see this guy, he has like a buzz cut, he looks really tough, like a soldier type dude. Like everyone like whispers like, this guy's an idiot, but he's a friend of Xi, so he got in the right place. Or Wang Huning is this guy. I have his book right here on my shelf, America Against America. He came here in the 90s and he wrote all this stuff about how America's weak and America sucks. And it's all just taken directly from like, cable news. It's all just like cable news crap. It's like, like the black people are ruining American cities with their crime. Just various things like, he just saw it all on cable news. He's like, America has become decadent. And it's all just like, but this guy is like, she's Rasputin. He's like the ideological, like impetus. He basically, or Dugin. He's more not like Rasputin. He's like Dugin in Russia, right? He's the ideological guy giving the ideas to Xi about like, and then he reads a lot of Carl Schmitt, the Nazi philosopher, Nazi legal scholar. And so Wang Huning is not, he's not the smartest guy in the world either. But Xi is very good at getting those loyal guys and getting his loyal coterie of dudes and placing them all around the government, and basically sidelining all the smart people who cared a lot about the economy that were hired by like Hu Jintao and Jiang Zemin. And so like all those guys are out, those guys are marginalized, and they're yelling from the wilderness, do stimulus, like, and then Xi is like, no, I shall do what I want. I am emperor. Like, and that's basically what I see is going on.
To that, maybe we'll wrap on this. Like, imagine a world where she sort of like, wrote the ship, to be example, like righted his ship, for example, like, or saved his legacy or whatever, like, gradually improved it over the next few years, what do you think would have to happen?
Oh, well, first he needs to just bail out everything. Just like let the bailouts flow, bail out the local governments, bail out the banks, even bail out big developers, bail everybody out. Central government debt go up, other kinds of debt go down. Do that, have like a year of just bailing everybody out, and then your central government will have debt. But like China still has the debt is still there, and it's just debt that Chinese people owe to other people. It's just now the central government is taking over the payment of it, so it's coordinated and centralized instead of decentralized through banks and local governments and a whole bunch of people who can just like not pay stuff back and just like or just reduce lending. Basically, it's centralized and coordinated instead of decentralized and chaotic. So just centralize the debt, right? It's not external debt. It's not debt they owe to foreigners. It's debt they owe to each other. And so you might as well have it through a central clearinghouse of debt called the central government instead of through all these independent little people who can fail and screw up. So just bail out, bail out, bail out. The industrial policy thing is like, they need to shift that so they're not just like blasting t-shirt cannons of money at people. And they need to make it more of an innovation and tech policy. So they should shift that and then just tone down all the wolf warrior rhetoric, like don't attack Taiwan. Ha ha ha. Like, don't like de-emphasize all these territorial disputes and just like go back to being like Hu Jintao is, go back to just like be a good neighbor. And like all these things are just things that like FDR did, right? FDR implemented the good neighbor policy with Latin America. We patched things up with the Latin American countries. People don't even know that happened. We just improved our international image so much. And then we bailed, like we didn't do exactly bank bailouts, but we did like liquidity stuff and going off the gold standard and other things that amounted to effectively bailing out the financial sector in America during the New Deal. And then I think we built infrastructure, and then we did technology policy for like World War II and afterwards. But ultimately these are like, Xi just needs to just copy the New Deal and then, be like FDR and then not like, I don't know, Brezhnev or whatever, right? Like, so whether or not he'll do that, basically China's whole story is a story in the modern age, I think, is a story of not knowing whether it wants to be like America or Russia. And then sort of doing a little bit of both. They've got American style malls with Russian style apartment blocks. Like Chinese people live in Russian housing and shop at American malls and drive on American highways. And like China needs to be more like America and less like Russia to succeed. America is a model for China's success. I know that Chinese propaganda focuses on like the West is decadent and falling and America sucks. But don't get high on your own supply. Right? Like America is a much better model for you than Russia. Russia is a fail whale. And but don't be like America today, be like America in the mid 20th century. And so that's what Xi should do. The more he clamps down and becomes like the USSR and whatever, the more they're gonna fail. That's what I think.
Yeah. Shall we wrap on that, or is there anything else on that topic worth?
I don't know. Do we have any other interesting questions this week? Like, did we get any other Q&A?
Yeah, we do, but I'm sensitive. I wonder if I should save it for next week. I'm sensitive to your time. Or
oh yeah, no, I'm good. So let's do it next week then.
Sounds good. Well, yeah, this is a great discussion on international development and China and Ben Bernanke and Xi's legacy and so far. And as always, until next time.
Until next time.
Econ 102 is a podcast from Turpentine, the network behind Moment of Zen, In the Arena, The Cognitive Revolution, and more. If you like what you hear, subscribe and leave us a review in the App Store. You can keep up with both of our Substacks for written analysis of the topics we cover in the show at noahopinion.substack.com and eriktorenberg.substack.com. Thanks for listening.